There is a place on Earth where a civilization built giants, and then vanished beneath their shadow. Hundreds of massive stone faces still stare across a barren horizon, frozen in time. They say nothing. They explain nothing. Yet their silence tells one of the most haunting stories in human history. This was not a collapse caused by invasion. No foreign army conquered this island. No empire absorbed it. No plague wiped out its people. The disaster came from within. Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island, sits alone in the vast Pacific Ocean, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. For centuries, it was one of the most isolated places ever inhabited by humans. There were no neighboring lands to flee to, no trade routes to rely on, no outside rescue. Everything this civilization needed came from that single island, and over time, they used it all. What happened here is not just ancient history. It is a warning carved in stone, a miniature version of a question that now confronts the entire world. What happens when a society consumes its home faster than it can survive? The arrival of the first people, around 1200 CE, Polynesian voyagers, reached Rapa Nui. They did not drift there by chance. They were among the greatest navigators the world has ever known, reading stars, winds, ocean currents, and the flight of birds to cross thousands of miles of open water. Their double-hulled canoes carried families, livestock, tools, and seeds, everything needed to start a new society. When they first saw Rapa Nui rising from the horizon, it must have felt like destiny. Rolling volcanic hills, fertile soil, freshwater streams, and vast forests of towering palm trees that stretched across the island. To them, this was not barren rock, it was opportunity. They named it Rapa Nui, Big Island. Though small by continental standards, it was vast compared to their boats. They built homes, they planted crops, they adapted to the land, and slowly, a distinct civilization took shape, a land that seemed endless. In those early centuries, Rapa Nui was rich with life. Giant palm trees once covered much of the island, some growing more than 60 feet tall. These forests provided wood for homes, canoes, tools, and fire. Birds nested in enormous numbers. The surrounding ocean teemed with fish. Volcanic soil made agriculture productive. To a growing population, the island felt abundant, stable, and capable of sustaining life indefinitely. Like many civilizations before them, the people of Rapa Nui believed nature existed to support their ambitions, and their ambitions would become legendary. The rise of a unique culture. Over generations, Rapa Nui developed its own identity. Clans formed, chiefs gained power, spiritual traditions deepened. At the center of their worldview was the belief that ancestors continued to influence the living. The dead were not gone. They were watching, judging, and protecting. To honor them, the people of Rapa Nui began creating something extraordinary, the moai, faces of power. Across the island, they carved massive stone statues from volcanic rock. These figures, known as moai, has not art in the modern sense. They were sacred embodiments of ancestral power. Each moai represented a revered ancestor of a clan. The larger the statue, the greater the prestige of the family that built it. Some moai stood more than 30 feet tall. Some weighed over 80 tons. They were carved at a volcanic quarry called Rano Raraku, where nearly 1,000 unfinished statues still lie today, frozen mid-creation. Once carved, the moai were transported miles across rugged terrain to ceremonial platforms called ahu that lined the island's coastline. How exactly they moved these colossal figures remains debated. Some theories suggest they were rolled on logs. Others propose they were rocked upright with ropes, inching forward in a coordinated movement. Whatever the method, it required immense organization, labor, and resources. This was not a small ritual. It was a civilization-wide project. Growth, competition, and pride. As more moai were erected, Rapa Nui's population grew. Villages expanded. Agriculture intensified. Ceremonies became more elaborate. What began as religious devotion slowly transformed into competition. Clans raced to build larger, more impressive statues than their rivals. Prestige became tied to stone. to height, size, and visibility. Stopping was unthinkable. To stop meant losing honor. To stop meant losing power. So they continued. The invisible cost of greatness. Every moai required wood. Wood for carving tools. Wood for transport. Wood for construction. Wood for fire. At first, this seemed harmless. The forests were vast. The island felt limitless. But trees do not regrow quickly, especially in a harsh ocean climate. Over time, pollen records from the island reveal a dramatic shift. The once dense palm forests began to thin. Open land replaced shaded groves. Soil erosion increased as roots no longer held the earth together. The island's ecosystem, once balanced, started to unravel. Yet the people of Rapa Nui did not slow down. They carved more statues. They built more platforms. They pushed their society further, because in their world, prestige, identity, and spiritual favor were tied to the moai, a closed system with no escape. Unlike continental civilizations, Rapa Nui had no neighboring lands to trade with, no distant forests to replace lost timber, no external resources to import. Everything they needed had to come from the island itself. This made their society both resilient and dangerously fragile. In a closed system, small decisions accumulate into irreversible consequences. And Rapa Nui was a closed system. The tipping point approaches by the 15th century. The signs of strain were impossible to ignore. Forests had largely vanished. Bird populations declined. Building materials became scarce. Agriculture weakened as soil erosion worsened. The very success of Rapa Nui, its statues, its growth, its ambition, was undermining its own foundation. But instead of retreating, competition intensified. Clans built even larger moai, trying to outshine one another. Pride replaced caution. Prestige replaced survival. A world on the brink. From the coastline, Rapa Nui still looked powerful. Rows of towering moai lined the shore, their stone faces gazing inland as if watching over the people. But behind them, the island was changing. What had once been a green paradise was becoming barren, and the society that depended on that land was moving closer to a breaking point. A question that lingers: was this collapse inevitable? Or was it the result of human choices, ambition, competition, and the refusal to recognize limits? Rapa Nui was not destroyed by outsiders. It was shaped, and ultimately threatened, by its own people. And in that truth lies the heart of its story. By the late 15th century, Rapa Nui no longer looked like the island the first voyagers had found. Where towering palm forests once stood, there were now open, wind-swept plains. Archaeology tells a stark story. Around 1600 CE, almost every large tree on the island was gone. The very wood that had enabled the carving and transport of the moai had vanished. And without trees, everything changed. Canoes could no longer be built. Fishing beyond the shoreline became nearly impossible, cutting off one of the island's most important food sources. Birds that once nested in the forests disappeared, and with no roots to hold it in place, the soil began to wash and blow away. The island that had once felt abundant now felt small, exposed, and fragile. Yet the statue building did not stop. A society under strain. As resources dwindled, pressure built across the island. Food became scarcer. Land became more valuable. The clans grew more suspicious of one another. What had once been a system of prestige and spiritual devotion began to crack under the weight of survival. The chiefs who had once commanded respect through the moai found their authority weakening. When people are hungry, symbols of power mean less. Discontent spread quietly at first, then openly. The fall of the moai culture sometime between the 16th and 17th centuries, something dramatic happened. Across the island, moai began to fall. Not from earthquakes, not from storms. They were deliberately toppled. Statues that had stood for generations were pushed from their platforms. Faces that once looked over the land now lay shattered on the ground. This was not random destruction. It was rebellion. The old religious and political order, built around ancestor worship and monumental statues, was collapsing. Power shifted away from the elite who controlled the moai to new leaders tied to a different belief system. The Birdman cult. a system that valued individual competition over massive stone monuments. Rapa Nui was reinventing itself, not by choice, but by necessity. A broken environment, a broken society. The environmental damage could not be undone. Without large trees, there was no way to restore the old way of life. Houses became smaller and simpler. Tools were made from stone and bone instead of wood. A population likely declined as food grew scarce. Evidence suggests famine, conflict, and possibly even cannibalism emerged during this period, a grim reflection of how desperate conditions had become. The civilization that once built giants now struggled simply to survive. First contact with the outside world in 1722, Dutch explorers became the first Europeans to reach Rapa Nui. What they saw shocked them. They did not find a thriving empire of stone builders. Instead, they encountered a sparsely populated, deforested island dotted with fallen statues and ruined platforms. The grandeur of the past was still visible, but only as a memory etched into the landscape. To the Europeans, it was a mystery. They could not understand how such massive monuments had been built by a people who now seemed so diminished. They did not see a collapsed civilization. They saw a puzzle. The final blow's European contact had not saved Rapa Nui. It made things worse. In the 19th century, slave traders abducted large portions of the population. Diseases brought from abroad spread rapidly among those who remained. Missionaries disrupted traditional culture, and much of what was left of Rapa Nui's original society disappeared. By the late 1800s, only a few hundred indigenous inhabitants survived. The island that had once supported a vibrant civilization had been reduced to a shadow of itself. Why Rapa Nui collapsed? Rapa Nui did not fall because of one single disaster. It was a slow, cumulative process. Deforestation led to ecological decline. Ecological decline led to resource scarcity. Scarcity fueled social conflict. Conflict dismantled political and religious systems. Each step reinforced the next. The people of Rapa Nui did not wake up one day and decide to destroy their home. They made thousands of small decisions, each reasonable on its own. That together led to catastrophe. A small island, a global lesson. What makes Rapa Nui so haunting is not just its isolation. It is how closely its story mirrors our own world today. Like Rapa Nui, modern civilization depends on finite resources. Like Rapa Nui, we build monuments to progress, cities, industries, technologies that require immense environmental input. And like Rapa Nui, we often fail to recognize limits until it is too late. The island was a closed system. Earth is also a closed system. There is no second planet to escape to. No external civilization to rescue us. No endless frontier of untouched resources. Everything we need must come from here. The silent warning of the statues. The fallen moai are not just archaeological relics. They are a message carved in stone. They show that great civilizations can rise from ingenuity and ambition, and fall from overconfidence and blindness. They prove that environmental collapse does not look like a sudden apocalypse. It looks like slow decline, barely noticed, until it becomes irreversible. Rapa Nui was not destroyed by outsiders. It was shaped, and ultimately, threatened by its own people. But it is also a story of resilience. Despite everything, the descendants of its original inhabitants are still there today, preserving their culture and history. Their story is not only one of failure, it is also one of survival. The question that remains, if a small island society could overuse its resources and nearly collapse, what does that say about a global civilization doing the same thing on a planetary scale? Rapa Nui asks a simple, uncomfortable question. Are we any wiser than they were?